on.
Hi guys, Just E here, back for another Motivational Monday. Alright, I want to get into my quote. The world is heavy, but your bones, just a cubic inch, can hold 19,000 pounds. Ounce for ounce, they're stronger than steel. Atom for atom, you are more precious than diamonds. Stars have died so that you may live. Remember this the next time you feel weak or worthless. That is, the world is heavy. My favorite quote, and I'm going to start every Motivational Monday with it because I think that it's a perfect way to remember how strong you are. Anyway, I do want to make a point that everything that I'm saying is not in replace for actual medical health and professional advice. This is just stuff that I'm kind of breaking down in layman's terms in a way that it helped me understand and help me grow and become a better person and start actually putting in the efforts and doing the things that I've always wanted to do. So if you guys tuned into the last episode, we touched a little bit on what fight or flight means. But I wanted to dive deeper into it because I think personally, when I'm going through my stressors, the problem is that I immediately turn it into a fight or flight. And that's not healthy for anybody when you are not in a life-threatening situation. So, just like always, I'm going to get out my handy dandy notebook. Fight or flight, freeze or fawn, is a physical reaction that occurs in response to a perceived harmful event, attack, or threat to survival. So basically, you start to have a fight or flight response when your body starts to interpret something as if it's going to be a threat to your life. A lot of that is triggered by fear. For an example, you could have the fear of failing a test. And in that case, that fear isn't really a fight or flight situation. But when we were going over fear, we went over how when it's bad for you is when it turns into chronic fear, where you're starting to turn into this fight or flight response every single time. So that's why I wanted to go into fight or flight response, because it's basically talking about how when that fear turns into, oh my gosh, I might die. So before we get really deep into fight or flight, we do have to bring up, which we've also brought up in the last episode, the sympathetic nervous system. I'm pretty sure I nailed it this time. So just to go over how it relates to fight or flight, basically when that's triggered, I'm going to read from my handy dandy notebook. So basically it's releasing hormones that are either prompting you to stay and fight or run away and save your life. So in today's society, since we're not in a place where we're normally fighting off a bear or something that's gonna end our lives, this nervous system sometimes gets set off over very little minuscule things, such as your test. Like if you don't pass your test, all of a sudden you're having these panic attacks and you're having these problems, all because your nervous system is getting triggered in such a way that you're causing a fight or flight response. And I think that's a good reason why it's important to dive into fight or flight, because just like every negative, there is a oxymoron, there is a positive, there's a reason why it's there. So that is why when you are experiencing this fight or flight response, if you can actually start to dive into what the triggers are, how am I knowing if I'm even going through a fight or flight response, what does it mean? I think that can help bring us to a place where when we feel it, we can actually think about, is this something that's going to end our lives? Because for an example, something that I know I always experience a fight or flight response is when a relationship ends. It's really hard sometimes to accept a relationship that's ending, because not only are you in a place where you're kind of questioning, what could you have done better? What did you do wrong? Why did this happen? But 9 times out of 10, even if you're the one who broke up, you're kind of just sad that it didn't work. There is a feeling of failure there, a feeling like I didn't do right, and what am I going to be successful now moving forward? And for some people, that really does turn into a fight or flight response, and that makes them act very in panic mode, and then they end up making really silly decisions, like sending that long text message of like all your emotions at once in that moment that you might not even truly be feeling in the long run. Like it might be something you feel right in that moment, but then in the long run, you're like, this might have been really good for me. I feel really healthy. I feel good that I have distanced myself from that person. And you'll realize that just like the person who had to do the breakup, it was necessary. So in both parties, it's really difficult. And that's just an example in a relationship situation. Obviously, there's multiple different examples where you, like I said, have a test coming up and you want to make sure that you pass it. Whether it's going out and being social and trying to figure out how you're going to navigate emotions that might trigger just because you're out in the real world and you can't control what's around you. So things do happen. And so it's understandable why we start to feel these fight or flight moments. Especially with online, there's so much crazy divide online where, this side is saying fearmonger this and this side is saying fearmonger that. And we're not really talking about the middle ground. So I think in a lot of ways when we're watching this online things, it definitely helps bring a fight or flight response. So I'm just going to use this for like an example. If you're like around somebody that you don't really understand, whether there's somebody in the LGBTQ community, whether there's somebody who has dark skin and you feel uncomfortable around that because of your upbringing, and whether it's because like whatever it could be, when you start to feel like that person is threatening, I think it's very important to kind of like look inwards and see if you're having maybe a fight or flight response. I know for me, growing up, a lot of people would come off very threatening to me, or they would treat me a certain way. I dealt with a lot of racism, obviously, like a lot of people who are in my shoes, who are from, an ethnic background. And so when I was experiencing a lot of these things, obviously in the moment, I would experience fight or flight because in the moment, that person was threatening me. They were threatening my person, my life, my being, who I am, a part of how I identify myself. So in a lot of ways, I would get very like aggressive with that person, and it never really ended well because it turned into two people just being on the defense. And I'm not saying that you should have to be the one to be on defense. I think a lot of times the best defense you can do is just let it go and walk away and not even bother and don't give them the time. Live your life and just be happy. And I think that's like the best way to stick it to them. So, they can be angry and be obsessed over whatever they're going through in their mind, but you can go live your life and be happy and not have to worry about it because it's not going to affect your daily life. And so in the same regards, if it is something where it affects your daily life, I could imagine you're going through a fight or flight all the time. I'm very lucky that I have cultivated an environment that if people are showing any form of that around me, whether it's because I'm a woman, whether it's because I'm Black, whether it's because I do kind of identify with the LGBTQ community in many different ways, whether it's any of those reasons, it's very easy for people to just label or stereotype. And I think in the same regards, the same thing happens with men. And I think a lot of it comes from this fight or flight response. It's like, just because you feel threatened that your sexuality, or threatened about your religion, or threatened about your ethnicity, I think all of those things, it's understandable to feel threatened. I think over the years, we've even developed our own patterns to be aware of it, because there was a time period where being different did cost you your life. Being different did cost you certain freedoms and certain like being available to certain things. So it makes sense that we experience this fight or flight response where when someone starts to threaten a piece of our personality or who we identify with, we begin to get very aggressive. Like if we could just recognize the difference between the fight or flight, I think we'd really be able to recognize the proper way to respond instead of react to things. So for an example, I just want to go a little more into terminology. I want to bring up what's happening with yourself. So the heart rate and blood pressure increases. This really breaks down to, oh, my little clip came off, that's okay. You start breathing faster because your heart rate and your blood pressure starts to increase. So basically this happens to help move oxygen and nutrients out to your major muscle groups. Right off the bat, it shows that when you're starting to go into a fight or flight response, it's turning into a physical reaction. It's not just mental anymore. You're not just thinking in your head like, oh my God, like this person has an issue with me. It's starting to feel like, oh my God, this person could potentially be harmful to my life. And I think that could even be as a simple level as like harmful to my living. Like, they might compromise my job because of the way that they treat me or the way that they view me. And so they might give me bad reviews, or they might talk down on me. And so in that case, it's like, that's a threat to your life, because if they compromise your job and then you can't make your pay, you can't pay your bills. That's a scary thing. And that makes sense for you to feel like fight or flight. But to be able to slow down and recognize, whoa, this is not a fight or flight, because they cannot end my life, like my physical being. These bad things could repercussion from their actions, but I will still survive. I will still find a way to get by. And 9 times out of 10, I'll find a better way to get by. Because if I am in a place that's making me feel this fight or flight response, then it's probably not healthy for you. And so where most people might rationalize why they should stay, they could maybe now realize what they're going through and say it's not worth it, and for themselves go find something better to do. Go like a better job, or something that suits them more, or something that caters to their needs more, whether it's because they're disabled or they have mental health or whatever it might be. And I think that it's really important for us to kind of get into this place where we can do that. I think when we expect everybody else to change around us, I think that you are now forcing something that really wasn't meant to be. And in that case, you're very rarely going to be happy. And if you are going to be happy, your happiness is going to cause misery to somebody else. So in the same regards where you felt like somebody else's potential happiness was causing you misery for whatever reason, it made them happy to do whatever they do, like you're kind of actually doing kind of the same thing back. So a lot of times I say, get out of there. Don't even bother. Now that's very different if you're in a situation where everybody's very sweet and loving and the environment is nice, but then you have that one bad apple that's just, maybe nobody really cares for them. And then in that case, maybe it is worth it to fight for your place there, and to say, hey, you know what, this person has problems with everybody, and I have a right to be who I want to be, and I won't let anybody bring me down or stop me, because this is where I'm meant to be. And that's very different. But in a work standpoint of view, there's another example of where your fight or flight, it can turn into a physical reaction, and then that physical reaction makes us react instead of slow down and think about what's best for us and then respond to the situation. And then maybe we'll get the outcome that we really want. In this work situation, for an example, whether the outcome is to go and find a better job that appreciates you more, or the outcome is to get rid of the bad apples so that everybody can be appreciated and enjoy their job more, you figure it out. But either way, let those miserable people stay with those miserable people and not, bother with them. And other miserable people can go to that place. And then you can go find the people who aren't miserable and enjoy working with people who enjoy working with you. And then you can also cultivate an environment where you're around non-miserable people, So I think there's a way to handle it either way. Once we start to break down fight or flight, I want to read a couple of things from my handy dandy notebook. Something that it explains and breaks down is that, you may become pale or even a flushed face because your blood hormones and your pain receptors are moving away from you. And on top of that, you might get like cold or clammy feet or hands. You might get goosebumps. Your pupils might dilate so that you can see better. And you just might have like a heightened sense of all your senses. And so this is all designed to help make you look and listen for things that could cause you harm. It can affect people differently. And so by identifying how this fight or flight response affects you, I think can make a big change on how you can get better results, because you can respond better in that sense. So some people, it affects their memory and it makes them sharp. It makes them very clear. It makes them remember every little single detail that they can think of. So for a small example, I was actually at an event yesterday, and it was an amazing event. It was a Pride event in Patchogue, Long Island, New York. Great, right on Main Street at Birdie's. It's a lot of fun. And with all these amazing people, I was like handing out my information just to promote my music. And there was this woman who leaned in and actually like stole in front of me. She took an item, a bracelet, off of a woman's stand and slipped it into her back pocket while she was in the middle of talking to me. And she actually used me as the scapegoat, because as I was handing her my music information on these little stickers I give out, she said, say it again, like she couldn't hear me. And she used the excuse to lean in and listen to me as a way to grab the item and slip it into her back pocket. It was so not cool. And I felt so uncomfortable because I'm like, you just made me an accomplice. So, in that moment, there was a big like fight or flight anxiety, because it's like, what do I do? Because like, I don't want to look like the bad guy, but I also don't want to like start stuff with this woman and like just flat out be like, you stole, and then cause a big scene. I don't want that either. So there was like so many things going through my mind. And I realized that for me, when I go into a fight or flight response in a situation like that, I become very clear-minded. I slow down and I remember every single second by second, minute by minute instant that happened. I remember her leaning in. I remember all the different aspects of her putting it into her back pocket, like everything. It was like clear as day in my mind, to the point where when I figured out what I was going to do, just knowing all the information that I had and how vivid it was in my mind, I didn't want to lose that. So I walked over to the woman and I did the same thing to the woman who owned the booth, saying like, hey, look at my stuff, blah, blah, blah. And when I got close enough to her, I kind of used the same tactic. And I whispered into her ear and I said, the girl over there just took one of your bracelets and put it in her back pocket. She stole. And she just went, oh. And I'm like, yeah, I'm so sorry. I just need you to know. And so I walked away, and there was a booth of women behind the girl who had like stuff to sell, and they had a bunch of free stuff. And I had noticed them watching. So I went over and I said, it wasn't just me, right? Because then I had to check my grounds. Because even though I'm seeing things very clear in my mind, there is some people who do black out, and they just like don't, know what's coming next and don't really remember everything that happened. I personally think a lot of that equates to when you get angry. Most people do that when they get angry, but some people just do that naturally. Some people will black out naturally out of fear, out of anxiety, out of stress, out of just having just that bare minimum conversation. So just recognizing in the moment that I was like remembering everything vividly, I just wanted to go and make sure that I wasn't having like maybe a blackout moment. Maybe I just was seeing things. Maybe she did just like put her hand back there but didn't actually put it in the pocket and actually like whatever. But those girls were able to verify, yes, we saw it. She put it in the back pocket and it's still there. And I watched as she went to go leave, and the woman stopped her and said, please give me this, give me the stuff, blah, blah, blah. And she tried to convince her that she had nothing. And then lo and behold, she finally went into her back pocket, pulled it out, and gave it to her. So, that's just a small example of how you can respond in a way that can just minimal damage. I could have screamed like, oh my God, and started to fight with her, and she could have been like, I never did anything, you did that. And she it could have been so much, but I found a way to make it so that that person can decide how they wanted to take control of their own situation. Because if I start drama with them and then they're just there, and maybe they're grateful that they didn't steal, but now that drama has kept everybody else in the party away from the booth because they're like, I don't want to be around that. That's drama. Now all of a sudden, that hurts her. But if we do it nice and quietly like we did, nobody even knew the girl stole. And we just quietly had her escorted out. And now that everybody can enjoy the event, it wasn't traumatizing for anybody. And nobody had to say, oh my God, this like LGBTQ event was ruined, So that's just a small example of like how I think that recognizing how it affects you can really like change how you respond. Like recognizing all the different symptoms and how it can then like start, knowing that the blood starts pumping harder, it starts pumping away from your heart into your limbs, and it makes like the deeper breaths, you're breathing heavier. Like if you start experiencing those things, you can recognize, okay, I'm in fight or flight. And then in that moment, if something starts happening, you can start like kind of taking a recognition, like, am I really fully present? Am I vivid? Am I actually seeing this? Or am I having like a blackout moment? And I think a lot of times if you can do both of those, you don't even get to the blackout because you're already starting to be present in the moment and be aware of what's going on. Little small thing, bladder control. So something that happens when you go into fight or flight response is you start to prioritize immediate survival. So what does that mean? So that means you start focusing on the crucial parts that matter to your body for survival in that moment. So for an example, digestion, reproduction, growth, and tissue repair are the 4 things your body focuses on the most when you are in fight or flight. Now, the reason why that is a problem is because now you're in a state where your body isn't really functioning optimally. It's really important to understand that fight or flight can cause a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, and that can seep into your everyday life if you are constantly living in that fight or flight For an example, the way that you are thinking, you know what I mean? If your body's solely focusing on reproducing and growth and digestion and tissue repair, it's not really thinking about problem solving. It's not really thinking about how to get through those small, minuscule, everyday life things. I think, for me at least, that might be a big reason why when I'm in fight or flight for an extended period of time, just doing something small like cleaning up or organizing, doing a load of laundry. I mean, like, literally all you have to do is like press a button once it's in there. It's not like you have to like take 3 to 4 hours to get everything done. So when you start to look at it in that aspect, you start to realize that this fight or flight is really starting to hinder your life. At least it was for me, and it probably still is, and I'm still kind of working through it, like everything that I go over. But because you're always growing and evolving, so you're gonna always be working on these things. But with that said, now understanding how fight or flight affects me and what I'm going through, that helped me kind of navigate now on a daily basis how to respond to things so that I'm not always reacting. I'm not always just living in this heightened sense. On top of that, when you kick that fight or flight response, it typically takes 20 to 30 minutes to calm down. So you have to think, if you're in a situation where your fight or flight response is constantly getting triggered, when you finally stop getting triggered, or your fight or flight finally slows down, and like it takes 20-30 minutes for the effects to wear off of you. And if you're somebody who's constantly getting triggered, there's a good chance that you're either going to get triggered before that 20 minute gets done, or the amount of peace you'll have before you start getting triggered again will be so minuscule that it's not going to be enough. That's why a lot of people turn to meditating. I think that praying is a form of meditating as well. So I think a lot of people who meditate kind of help clear their minds because they're focusing on something other than these little minuscule tasks that are making them feel anxious. And for some people, that peace and calm and quiet and getting away from that fight or flight response helps them then center and ground themselves so that they can start moving towards their day in a more productive manner. When we start to figure out when it's working for us versus working against us, we're going to be able to actually overcome the negative things in our lives and the things that are holding us back. And that's just what I'm experiencing. So how do we control it? Well, I have that written on my handy dandy notebook, okay? So how to control it? You need to get in touch with your physical, emotional, behavioral signs of stress. And that is very individual to you. You really need to put in the effort to dive into yourself and the things that you're experiencing and going through to try to be in a place where you're happy, because your happiness is going to be individual to yourself, just like your triggers are individual to yourself. So when you start understanding the emotional and physical, behavioral aspects of how you are as a person, you will be able to navigate communicating people and realizing where you can have healthy relationships with people. And when I say healthy relationships, it doesn't have to be a romantic one. It can be a work one. It can be a family one. It can be a friend one. It can be an acquaintance one. And also being able to recognize the difference between all that is really healthy. And if you're somebody who's maybe in the industry, understanding those relationships are really important. You can probably ask them, as someone who's trying to be in the industry. I took a hard L learning how to navigate and understand people and recognizing when someone has good intentions and has your back and wants to do what's right by you, and by somebody who just only sees you worth their time when it's worth it for them. Because when you're giving and you're not really getting anything back, you're going to get resentful. There's going to be negative emotions that go back and forth. And if people can't learn to communicate and navigate each other, that's going to be a problem. And the whole point of this is just point out how when you're in fight or flight response, it's impossible. When you're feeling in fight or flight constantly, it is impossible to navigate things. I mean, you might be in a situation where you're feeling fight or flight in a work situation with a partner where you don't know if you made the right moves working with them, and you can't see a place where you're actually going to succeed. And so then you're always constantly thinking in fight or flight. And so then you guys are constantly fighting and arguing. You might be in a situation where you're with friends and you are constantly in this fight or flight. So you are constantly looking for places where they're trying to screw you over or where they might be lying to you, and you're just constantly always on defense. And so And that can be with family. That can be with so many different things. And that's where I think that that's why I wanted to go into fight or flight. That's why I wanted to talk about fight or flight and what it meant to me and what I learned about it and just the information on, facts about fight or flight. Oh, okay. I forgot I had this. This is exciting. Okay, so handy dandy notebook time. Boom, 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 boom. All right. I want to talk about the endomatic nervous system. I probably butchered that, but who knows? It's kind of just balancing between how you react versus how you respond. To me, there's a difference between reaction and response. Response is when you take the time to think about it, think about the outcome that you want, and then you respond accordingly to try to get that outcome. Reaction is when you react off of emotion, off of what's happening in the moment, off of, limited information, whatever it might be. So it balances your fight or flight, which is obviously the sympathetic nervous system, and your parasitic, parasitic, but that's right there. No, I'm not saying it right, but that right there. A homeostasis built-in stability monitor. So it's like a monitor inside you that's kind of trying to like monitor how much homeostasis, how much calmness you have, how much you're relaxed. The main reason why we need to have this like system is so that we can balance to relax ourselves, so that we can serve and we can restore energy to our bodies. That's like in layman's terms what it's saying. So that's really kind of everything that I want to talk about when it comes to fight or flight. I just wanted to really talk about how it affects our bodies and how for different people it'll affect us, whether we are someone who blacks out or someone who gets very vivid and sharp in the moment. Either way, I wanted to talk about not only those things, but like I said, I cannot give you like solutions and answers. You have to learn about yourself to understand how to learn how to respond to these instead of reacting to the fight or flight. But I will say, there is a relaxation response with physical activity and just soul support. Having support somehow with your friends, family, or maybe even lean on an art or a craft or something to calm your mind and get yourself out of it. There are ways to obviously do it that is across the board going to help people. And one of them is relaxing, learning a way to decompress or tune out, whether that, like I said, is a physical activity, whether it's hanging out with people, whether it's just being able to vent and decompress to somebody. It's different for everybody. But having some form of relaxation, reading a book, talking, listening to music, whatever it might be, doing a physical activity, whatever it might be, it's very important to figure out what it is, because that's the first thing and that I think is most important to getting there. And then things that do really work, whether we want to believe it or not, is physical activity, sleeping well, and eating well. The reality is that everybody could benefit from that for multiple different reasons on way more than just helping control your fight or flight response, your stress levels, your fear level, So I just wanted to dive deep into these topics. I hope they help you the way they help me. I have to get better. I'm going to one day go in and put the all my sites, and I'll give you all those so that you can look up this information yourself and you can get involved yourself. But either way, fight or flight, that's what it's all about. Try to learn how to counteract it, what it does to you, what it means to you, and how it affects you, and how to go about it to get the best result possible. And that's the whole reason why I do Motivational Mondays, is to go over hard topics in the realm of health, mental health awareness, that can help bring us to a place where maybe we can learn how to look inwards and deal with our own stuff before we go out into the world and expect other people to deal with it. So, Motivational Monday. See you next time. The studio. This is a little more. You get to see a little bit more of the studio right now. It's a mess, obviously, and still not even close to done. But I did finally get some lav mics, so the next one should be a lot better audio. And I don't know if you'll see it. If I go over here, you might see it. Ooh, go. I got like a bunch of stuff set up so I can start recording again. My microphone's right here. And then like in the back is where we're gonna have like, if you have like an instrument or anything like that that's kind of big, like a drum set or anything like that, you'll be able to go back here. But this is the smaller studio, so it will be dedicated more to electronic sounds and stuff like that. I do have a piano that I might bring down here. I don't know, I really like where it is because I practice upstairs at the window. So I don't know if I actually want to bring that down here or not, but that's the idea. Is I do have like a smaller piano right here, so that does help. You know, I can just like do, but like I said, this is all mostly this studio is a smaller studio. It's going to be the smallest studios out of all of my studios. So it's just a little more quaint and quiet. And then behind this camera is the vocal booth. It's a smaller booth. It's just going to be meant for like a singular person. It's maybe going to be meant for an instrumentalist. I'm not really sure yet. It depends on, I have to like kind of seal the booth and then go in there with an instrument and see how it feels. But I think it's going to be solely for just recording vocals. Either way, come on this journey with me at the studio. Thank you. Bye. You're so close to your turn. Just keep fighting. 'Cause I know life gets hard. Bills and things can break you down. Every day it's like having a new thing shoved in your face. So easy to put your dreams in a box and your mind's addict and find a reason, an excuse to stop believing in magic. But it's all around you if you open your mind.